Hello, welcome to the Columbus NASFiC Ohio Fan Clubs and Convention panel. My name is Joel Zockham. I'm the moderator for this hour, even though since 1983 I've lived around 100 miles south of the Ohio border. Still, I grew up near Cincinnati, Ohio. My first convention was the 1968 MidwestCon in Cincinnati. And since until 1973, when I attended the Worldcon in Toronto, every convention I attended, which was MidwestCon, Marcon, and the real Octocon, were in the state of Ohio. In 1969, I joined the Cincinnati Fantasy Group, and even though before the pandemic, I only made one or two meetings a year. I'm still considered to be a member in good standing, and I'm probably the oldest continuing member of the club. So what's your experience in Ohio clubs and conventions, Doug?
Right. Well,
and introduce yourself, please.
My name is Doug Carey. I started reading science fiction in 1970, and my first convention was the Worldcon in Washington, D.C. in 1974. That was DisCon 2. They're about to have DisCon 3 next year, well, one way or another. I am a member of the science fiction book club, Harry, which meets in Canton every month. Currently, we're meeting on Zoom every Monday just to stay in touch. And that's a club that's been together since 1977 and is still around and picking something to read every month. As far as conventions, currently Marcon and Cleveland Concoction are my go-tos in the general area, although I do try to get to Worldcon when I can. And I know Confluence is in Pennsylvania and Starbase Indy is in Indiana, but I like both of those conventions as well. And I don't know, I'm not going to run through my whole history of conventions I've been to. Maybe we'll talk about that some more later.
Okay, Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Washington, and I live in Cleveland, Ohio. And I've been involved with fandom since I discovered Star Trek at age 15. And when I was at Ohio State, I managed to put on a con, even though I had never attended one, because that's what you do when you're 18 years old. But after that, I started going to cons. If anyone remembers the old Earth Con, which was held in Cleveland in the early 80s. Then I discovered Marcon, MillenniCon, and now Concoction, which is held here in Cleveland. Been to a few World Cons, was on the Concom of Marcon for a couple years running the Masquerade, and I used to edit a fanzine called Cleveland Ansible.
Okay, Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Barkley. I'm currently a columnist for File7to70.com. My first convention was MidwestCon 27 in June of 1976. And since then, I've been to over or nearly 200 conventions and 29 Worldcons.
Wow.
And I've been involved, besides MidwestCon, I've been involved with MillenniCon, which originally started in Dayton, Marcon, and down Joel's way. When it was active, I've gone to RiverCon, and we've lost MillenniCon a few years ago.
Yeah.
And MidwestCon's currently on a slight hiatus, but I'm proud to say that I've been to every MidwestCon since I got into fandom 44 years ago, from 1976 up until this year. I was also fan guest of honor at WindyCon last November.
Yeah. Well, I still got you beat since I've been to every MidwestCon since '68.
Well, we'll see how long that lasts.
Right. Okay, Michael.
I'm Michael Grossberg, and I remember when I was about 15 in Houston, during the original run of the 3-year Star Trek, somebody said, "Oh, there's a convention." I didn't know what it was, science fiction convention. I thought it was a Star Trek convention, but it was very confusing because I went to this room party and there's all these people dressed in medieval things. And then I discovered the Society of Creative Anachronism that for some reason was also holding its convention there. And I've gone to dozens of conventions since. My first Worldcon was Denver with Robert Heinlein as a guest in 1981. I've been to 8 or 9 Worldcons, but mostly up for the last 35 years, I've gone to Marcon in Columbus. And I've been half a dozen times to the regional conventions in Indianapolis, in Conjunction, Louisville, Cincinnati, until Millennicon stopped. I've been especially active since 1981 when I co-founded the Libertarian Future Society to help sustain the Prometheus Awards, which recently celebrated its 40th anniversary. And we presented our award online yesterday afternoon with the winner CJ Cherry and Jane Fancher for Alliance Rising personally appearing on Zoom and talking about their novel, which was exciting. And we had 2 past Prometheus winners, Sarah Hoyt and F. Paul Wilson, presenting some of the categories. So there's a network of freedom-loving science fiction fans who are neither left nor right, who have a focus for our fandom because there's a lot of work involved in reading, nominating, screening, judging, and selecting finalists for an award. And sometimes when we go to conventions, it's like you're busy working and doing stuff. I mean, I also was a division head of a Worldcon, the Atlanta Worldcon, I think it was 86, where they had a special awards category, and I was helping all the special awards. And I appreciate fandom because everybody's doing it out of love of the science fiction and the literature of the imagination and ideas. Nobody's getting paid for it. And I'm so happy to see it continuing even during a pandemic.
Okay. Well, one thing I was going to ask about is most of the conventions I've been to, Ohio and elsewhere, are fan-run conventions. And a couple of people have mentioned conventions in Ohio, which I've heard of, but for which I'm not that familiar. So Julie, is the recent Cleveland convention, is that fan run or is that a commercial con?
Oh no, it's very, very much fan run. Not commercial at all. It's a little different flavor from Marcon. It's kind of younger, if I could say that, in what it presents and everything. But it's very fan run. It's a great con. I would very much encourage anyone who has not sampled Concoction to try that. But in terms of commercial ones, if anyone remembers the old LaGrange Con, which was a Star Trek convention for about 10 years, I'm wearing one of the t-shirts. It started off fan run and then it kind of morphed into commercial in its last few years. And then also now we have, I'm blanking. What's the big one? The
Wizard World?
Pardon?
Do you mean Wizard World?
Yes,
or?
Wizard World. Yes, we have a Wizard World now in Cleveland, which I have not gone to because it's way too expensive for me. But we do have I think this would be like the 4th or 5th year that Wizard World has been in Cleveland.
Okay, and is there a particular focus for the Cleveland convention?
The Concoction? No, not really. I mean, it's general. I would say general science fiction. They bring in some authors. I would say if it has a focus, it's on self-published authors and emerging authors. They have a room that's kind of devoted to people talking and selling about their books. So that's kind of a nice feature. Yeah.
Now my mind is blanking, but there used to be a convention in Columbus that sort of focused on new and upcoming authors.
Context.
Thank you.
Loved it.
Folded some years more literary, and they were small, but it really had a lot of focus on literary stuff. And then they had one of those recent politically correct, incorrect blow-ups, which I thought was such a shame because it was such a good convention. I really miss it.
Okay. To be honest, it's probably been over 30 years since I've been to a Marcon. So does anybody want to take the bait and describe the current Marcons?
Well, they had to move out of the downtown convention center. They were pushed out by some other things, and they've been there for so many years, for like 20 years. And so they, in the last year or two, they were going to be at this north central Columbus hotel. And of course, then the pandemic hit. So that's an adjustment. They can't have as much space. I think that, there's boom and bust cycles. I know that Marcon, when I first started going in the mid 80s, they were having 600, 800 people. They started bringing in more better known authors. When they had more than one author writer, it attracted more people, and they got over 1,000. They got to like 1,500, 2,000 people by 2000, 2001. The LFS did an LFS con as part of it, and we paid to bring in 4 or 5 major authors who had won our award, like Werner Vinge and F. Paul Wilson and L. Neil Smith. And that attracted several hundred more people. But there was also, I think, a different generational thing going on, because a lot of people were getting older and there weren't as many new, younger fans. And I think with the various recessions and challenges, they haven't been as large in the last couple of years, but it's still been a great convention. They try to do everything, where they have good costuming and an art show, and they have all kinds of panels. They always have a nice science track, and they have craft panels. So they try to be everything, but they're not over focused on the multimedia stuff like, Comic-Con. They always have a strong literary core, which I really like.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on that, I definitely agree with what you just said. I remember Marcon at its heyday, and it was amazing. And we would just take over this huge space. I mean, everywhere you looked was someone in costumes and T-shirts and everything. And I remember J. Michael Straczynski speaking to this huge group of people,
Yes.
And at the heyday. But yeah, things change. And I think now I am not on the Concom, so I don't want to speak for them. But I think one of the things that happened is that it's my perception that it's harder to get authors to come out now. I don't know if that's true. That's just my perception, that maybe a lot of them would rather stay home and keep writing and just blogging and stuff like that. It's harder to contact them. I mean, I remember back in the day, this is with Star Trek people, you could practically call up the original actors, some of them, and say, hey, come on down to my con. And my perception is that it's a lot harder to do that these days. So yeah, the last few years of Marcon at the convention center, I felt like we were kind of rattling around in this big space. I remember one year there were like gymnastics going on and a graduation for nurses going on. It's like, where are we? We're not creating this world. So I think we were all kind of looking forward to last year when they moved to a smaller space. I thought that was very successful. It kind of created that spark and that energy again that you want in a con. And of course, this year we didn't get to have it, but I'm looking forward to it next year.
I am too.
I just want to jump in and say that for a long time, since the heyday of Marcon, I didn't go to Marcon because I was usually working. I was working in an independent bookstore, and I just couldn't get the time to go. However, since I've retired from the bookstore, I did a day trip up to Marcon when David Gerald was one of the guests of honor. And I found myself pleasantly surprised that it's a smaller, more intimate convention. And I had a good time.
Yeah, like I said, I hadn't been to a Marcon in a long time. And when I went, it was probably about a 300-person convention. So that was kind of different.
I still have 800 people, and for years it was Ohio's oldest and largest science fiction and fantasy convention. I don't know if anybody is
largest, yes. Oldest, no.
Oldest continued operating. Was there somebody older around?
Yes, and that's what I was going to talk about. A completely different type of convention is MidwestCon, which was the first convention I went to, and up until this year had been every year since 1950, because the 1949 WorldCon was in Cincinnati and MidwestCon was started the next year, even though it was not originally in Cincinnati. But MidwestCon is a relaxicon. There are no guests. There is no programming except on rare occasions. One year, Fan Historicon piggybacked on us. So there was actually a program track at MidwestCon. There is a dealer's room. There is occasionally an art show, but not for the last several years. What there is are a couple really good con suites. There are occasionally wonderful parties, and it's basically a place for science fiction people to meet, talk, and party. Because of that, it's a smaller convention. I think in the 50 some odd years I've been going, it's probably gotten close to 400 once or twice. And unfortunately, in the past couple years, we've been around 75 people. But it's 75 people who know each other and love the convention and want to, because of that, the problem with MidwestCon is it does not attract newer and younger fans because they've known to expect different type of conventions. You want to add something to that, Chris?
Yeah, MidwestCon 27 was kind of a conflagration of good things as far as I'm concerned, because June of 1976, there was a convention in New York called SF Expo. And it was a commercially run convention. It went bust. And some of the authors who were attending that convention says, let's just go to MidwestCon, because MidwestCon is legendary as a hangout for all sorts of science fiction writers. Harlan Ellison, Arthur C. Clarke, and all the old time, first canon type writers were good. So when I showed up because my good friend, Michael, and I saw an ad in the rear of Analog. And I said to her, hey, they're having this convention down in Norwood, which is a city surrounded by the city of Cincinnati, at the Equality Inn. It's only like 2 or 3 miles away. And says, hey, let's go to that. And she says, oh no, that's probably just for professional writers. And, they'll just throw us out. And says, you know what? You can sit home, but I'm going down. I'm going to check this out. And we both went, and we were astounded by the number of professional writers who were there that particular weekend. Do you remember, Joel, that weekend in particular? I mean, I think Fred Pohl was there. Joe and Gay Haldeman were there. Gordon Dixon was there. And for the last time, Lee Brackett and Edmund Hamilton were just sitting out by the pool. And Edmund Hamilton died later in 1976 or early 1977, and Lee Brackett died in 1978. And being new in fandom, well, I was an old-time reader because I really started getting into science fiction, knowing writers, who they were from reading their works. And so I knew who Edmund Hamilton and Lee Brackett were. And my mouth was just open the entire weekend. And from there, I just started going to conventions like practically every weekend.
Yeah, I remember either the first or second MidwestCon I went to, so either 68 or 69. Fritz Leiber was wandering around carrying a couple of foils, trying to find someone to fence with.
Oh. Where and when is this convention?
MidwestCon is in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's always the last full weekend in June. So if the Sunday is July 1st, it's the previous weekend, but it's, and we've been at a DoubleTree actually in Sharonville, one of the suburbs, for the past 10 years. Of course, this year it was canceled for obvious reasons. And unfortunately, I haven't figured out a way to do a virtual Relaxicon.
No, that's because too many of our members have flip phones instead of laptops.
Right. before we go, we've gotten a question or two about clubs, so I want to get back to clubs. But before we do that, I want to mention a couple of my favorite Ohio conventions that do not exist anymore. What I keep calling the original Octagon, because the Irish National Convention, which came later, is also called Octagon, used to take place in Sandusky, Ohio, back in the, I guess it probably started in the 60s and lasted through the 70s at least. It was kind of unique in that it was held in Sandusky because they wanted to attract people from the Cincinnati, Columbus area, as well as the Cleveland area and the Detroit area. And the hotel it was at was called the Green Tree Inn, which had a bowling alley attached. And there was always a Cincinnati versus Detroit bowling tournament during the convention, because
Awesome.
the Detroit fans had their own bowling team, and the Cincinnati team was basically whoever they could find who said they knew how to bowl.
Oh man, I wish before my time, but you know, I have 2 bowling balls and bowling shoes, so I would have crushed it.
Yeah. The other one was a thing called Space Con, which was lasted for around 7 years, maybe more, in Wapakoneta, Ohio, which was Neil Armstrong's birthplace. And the first Space Con was held on the 10th anniversary of the moon landing. And it was another relaxicon, like Midwest Con, but what was nice, it was at the Holiday Inn, which was right next to the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. So while there was no programming per se, you could go over and spend some time at the museum. Does anybody have anything else further to add about conventions, or do we want to get to the clubs?
I wanted to mention just some Millennicon's been mentioned, EarthCon's been mentioned. Context was a great convention. It's been mentioned. I've always loved something called Acro Minicon, which ran for a few years at the University of Akron. And I also had a wonderful time. I don't know if there was ever more than one, but there was a Kent State University had a 4th Dimension Con put on by the club there with Harlan Ellison, Joe Haldeman, and Fred Pohl as the guests of honor, and that was a blast. And Julie, you're mute, but were you going to say something about the International Superman Convention in 1988?
Well, yes, of course, Doug, I was going to mention that. I think that's the only one you haven't mentioned. Yeah, if anyone remembers the Superman Expo in 1988 in Cleveland, it was definitely a one-off because it was for the 50th anniversary of Superman being created in Cleveland. It was a great con. Unfortunately, you know, it didn't, the convention committee didn't continue and go forward, but we had a parade and all kinds of things. It was amazing.
Okay, and Chris, didn't you run or help run a convention at the University of Cincinnati one year?
Yes. It was in March of 1986. It was called Synclave. It was done in conjunction with the University of Cincinnati's English department. They fronted the money to bring in 3 guests of honor: Ed Bryant, Chip Delaney, and Alfred Bester. And it was a remarkable weekend, but for some reason we did not get a lot of publicity, so the convention completely ran into the red. But the people who had actually attended had a great time. In fact, one marriage actually resulted from that convention, so it wasn't all that bad. But I've never chaired another convention.
Okay, let's talk about your fan clubs. As I mentioned before, both Chris and I are members of the Cincinnati, at least I claim to be a member of the Cincinnati Fantasy Group. Do you, Chris?
Yes, I do.
Okay, which I believe started, I'm not sure, I believe it started in the late 30s, 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
And when I joined in 69, when I showed up at a meeting along with two friends of mine, Frank Johnson and Brad Balfour, we were at least half the age, if not more, if not less than any of the other attendees at the, but it's gotten a little better. Generally, there are meetings every other week at they're called meetings, but they're sort of more parties at
Gossip
someone's
parties.
house every other week, even though the only meeting thing is they do collect dues, a portion of which goes to the host, a portion of which goes to the club. And they're the group who puts on MidwestCon and used to put on OctaCon. So does anybody else want to talk about their local club?
I wanted to point out the highlights for me of Harry meeting in Canton, Ohio, monthly. Besides several weddings resulting from the club over the years, it's spun off an SCA, Society Creative Anachronism chapter, has spun out of the club. But we've had some great writers and authors in over the years. I've got some of their books surrounding me, and R.M. Melick has was a regular, came to read and visit. We had Maureen F. McHugh came and read The Lincoln Train, which she won the Hugo for just a couple weeks after she visited the club, and that was a real highlight. Joe Clifford Faust, he hasn't had a big output lately, but he put out some very, a mix of funny and thrilling science fiction novels some years back. That's Joe Clifford Faust, worth finding old books and looking for new stuff from him, I hope. Mary Terzillo used to be there regularly, who is still around and active in science fiction writing and writing fiction and poetry. Marie Vibert, if you haven't heard her, she's coming up fast, and she's been to Harry to visit and do a little reading. She has, I guess, her first novel just is coming out. I wish I had more info at my fingertips. T.J. McFadden is a Canton author who was a regular at Harry. And also we've got coming regularly Sean DeLauder, who is an independent, publishing independently and trying to get some traction in the science fiction field. So I mean, we've just really been blessed with having a lot of writers.
Don't forget Jeff.
And Jeff
Landis.
Jeff, though, hasn't been to our meetings, I don't think. I mean, was Jeff, I don't remember, Mary, do you ever remember Jeff being at a meeting? I don't. Yeah, Mary Terzillo came regularly, and I think when she met Jeff, she found better things to do, and wasn't at the meetings much. Jeff Landis is, of course, a fantastic Northern Ohio science fiction writer, writing hard science fiction, and I love everything he puts out, and he's real active at the conventions too. But he wasn't.
You can feel free to disown him if you want to. He's not showing up at the meeting.
That's okay. But
well,
now we're meeting on Zoom, and it's done a lot to keep our, it's really at the core, it's a friendship and mutual support organization, and Zoom has allowed us to keep that going so far during the COVID-19 problem.
Well, the Cincinnati Fantasy Group is more of a social group than a writers group, but we have had several writers as members currently, and I'll probably forget some, currently Stephen Lay, who has been being published by Daw, Michaela Jordan, Laura Resnick on occasions, even when she's not busy herding cats, literally.
Literally.
She fosters cats and probably usually has about 8 to 10 living with her at a time. Mike Resnick, before he passed away, was a regular attendee, and so was Gene Wolfe when he lived in the Cincinnati area. Julie, is there any clubs in Cleveland area that you're part of or you know of?
Yeah, there's a few. One is called Warped Core, get it? But we're more of a friendship group, but we do kind of coalesce around science fiction. We meet mainly just for parties right now. I want to also mention Lagrange Con, which is a Star Trek group that's been around for quite a while. They were putting on Lagrange Con in the 80s. And the group is a lot smaller now, a lot quieter, but it's still going on. And then if you want writers groups, we have the Cajun Sushi Hamsters from Hell, which Mary Tuzillo and Jeffrey Landis are very, and Marie Vibert are very active in. And they've had a lot of authors there publish. And of course, I don't have those names at my fingertips. But that group's been going on for quite a while. They meet once a month to critique each other's work.
Okay. And Michael, I don't want to leave you out, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not from Ohio, are you?
Well, I live in Columbus, Ohio since
you live in.
I did mention earlier that I'm a native of Houston, Texas.
Okay.
But, you know, I've lived and worked in California and in Indiana, in different parts of the country. But since 1985, I've been a resident of Columbus, Ohio. So Marcon's really my hometown science fiction convention and context when it was there. In terms of my group, the Libertarian Future Society, we have occasional conventions that we try to piggyback as part of something bigger, where we've done it at a NASFiC. Yeah, the Armadillo-Con in the mid 80s in Austin was one of the best NASFiCs, and we did some stuff there. And we try to, I think there's great synergistic effects. And it's wonderful when Marcon sometimes has had the Klingon Society meeting, or this year NASFiC had the Eric Flint mini-con. I think that's a great way to piggyback, because then you get some of the advantages of the bigger things, but you can also have your own program track. You don't even have to have a full program track. You can have selective things for at certain times, and then give your members the chance to go to other things at other time, rather than completely being in your own little insular world.
Yeah, but in addition to your society, are there any fan clubs in Columbus that you know of or have attended meetings of?
They're, you know, over the years they rise and fall, but you know, there were Klingon Star Trek things where I would see them at Marcon, and sometimes would hear about parties. And I think there was a Babylon 5 grouping. I remember years ago, we used to get together. Some of the people who knew each other through Marcon would go to someone's house, and we would together watch the new episode of Babylon 5. And I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe it was mid 90s, when Straczynski, who wrote that, came as the main guest of honor of Marcon. And it was so impressive because it was syndicated. It was the first time in the history of television that there had been one writer for an entire TV series where he wrote every single episode, and it had a beginning, middle, and end. From the beginning, he had this map that it's going to, all the complex subplots over 5 years. And I don't know if they've done that since then, but that was a real incredible achievement. So there were a lot of people who were like, when that was new, there was like a Babylon 5 affinity group, but I think those things rise and fall. Now you see that with Star Wars, because it's so mainstream. I don't think you see that with Star Trek anymore. I don't know. Does anyone else know if the Star Trek convention, there aren't any separate Star Trek conventions anymore. There used to be in the 70s, but I think it's faded because I think they beat the franchise to death.
There was a big I think a Star Trek only convention in Las Vegas a couple years
Yes.
back that I know of.
Yeah, yeah. If I could jump in, my perception is that the only Star Trek cons going on now are in Vegas, because my other perception, or of course, I'm not 100% sure, but my understanding is that the whoever puts it on at Vegas is also locked in all the Star Trek actors to a contract, and they're not able to go to other cons, or they don't entertain those other invitations. So once that happened, that really kind of dried up. Or they go to Wizard World or something like that, where they're guaranteed to be paid, they're guaranteed a large audience.
Right.
So once that happened, it really kind of dried up the little local fan run Star Trek conventions.
Okay. We got our 15-minute warning right now, but before we're still on the subject of clubs, and I know the people there was a club in Dayton that used to put on MillenniCon, which started out in Dayton and then moved to Cincinnati. I'm not sure if they're still active. Do you know anything about that, Chris?
That's the Miami Valley Literary Society. They would actually put on MillenniCon as a staging ground for getting donations of books of money for literacy projects in the Dayton area. The convention chair, her name's Christy Johnson, or at least she was the last chairman of that group, moved to Cincinnati, which is why the convention ended up here in Cincinnati, I think like early 2000s. And it ran until its 30th anniversary, which was about 5 years ago. And the group, the Miami Valley Literary Group, is still active as far as I know, but it's really more of a community chess type group and not a social group. But as far as I know, they're still in contact with each other.
Okay. We have a couple questions and comments from the audience. One of the people have pointed out a couple other still active Star Trek conventions, Shore Leave, which is in Hunt Valley, Maryland, and Starbase Indy, which is in Indianapolis, which is a fan run, they say is a fan run Star Trek con. And we've also got a question, an interesting question, which came in earlier. Are localized science fiction clubs like Harry, the one that we talked about, rare? I know File 770 has a special section, is your fan club dying? So are fan clubs dying, or especially in the days of this pandemic? I know the Cincinnati Fantasy Group tried a couple meetings when the restrictions relaxed. Both were extremely sparsely attended, and then they decided it's not worth it. Hopefully it'll continue one of these days. And we've never tried something Zoom. So how good does Zoom work, Doug? You're muted or something. We can't hear you.
We sort of blundered into Zoom. We started out with trying Skype first. We do have an email circle. Told everybody to get on Skype on a Monday night. Most people, or a number of people, had a lot of technical trouble getting Skype to work for them. We switched to Zoom, and ever since then it's been great. So we've got 4, 6 people, which is our real core faithful at the Harry meetings when we're at the library live, still showing up for Zoom. And we switched from monthly to weekly, and we do have a few more at the official monthly meeting, because that has a topic and a book where we've selected, and a book discussion. The other ones are just friendship meetings, and we yak about, what's the new Star Trek cartoon? Below Decks. Yak about Below Decks or whatever's been on lately. But it's been great. People have been needing that boost of friendship and reassurance that people who care about them are out there, and that goes in all directions. And I think the Zoom at least is accomplishing that.
Well, regarding the Cincinnati Fantasy Group, I can't see that happening with us. It's not due to technical issues. It's just that, well, unless we can get Laura Resnick to do it, because she's good at herding cats. But I simply don't know whether folks in CFG are actually interested in doing a Zoom
Yeah.
meeting. Yeah, it's something we could probably throw out there. See what happens.
Right.
Our group has started to do Zoom meetings, and sometimes as part of our board meetings, and we're inching our way into there. It's a good way in between face-to-face meetings to sort of shore up context, because it's a lot less time consuming, and during the pandemic it's a lot less risky. I think it's best as a supplement. I think people are going to decrease their Zoom use after the pandemic fades, and they're back. But I think that people will find some new level at which they supplement face-to-face conventions with Zoom options or special events. And I think some of those authors who are so busy writing with their deadlines, they're going to probably favor, rather than going to a city for a book signing, to I'll show up on Zoom and we'll have people coming in and linked to some, Amazon website where you could buy their book.
Okay, question. Given the current age of most fans, how would you suggest getting younger members to join, especially in the current circumstances? Anybody want to address that?
Well, how did we all start? I think we started with reading. I remember I started to read at 3 years old, and probably by 5 or 6, I was reading science fiction. I remember at 8, I was reading a lot of Andre Norton and the Heinlein juveniles, and I just went on from there. If you don't fall in love with science fiction and fantasy from reading Tolkien and some of the classics, then I don't know how you then become a science fiction fan going to conventions. I don't think people become so much science fiction fans by watching the Twilight movies or the Hunger Games movies unless they then start to read the novels. I think you have to read first.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happened to me is I was, quote unquote, accosted by an older gentleman at a bookstore in downtown Cincinnati when I was like 16 years old. And of course, that was back in the 60s, which were a bit more innocent time. But apparently there was this gentleman by the name who became a friend of mine, Dale Tarr, who took it on himself to try to recruit people into the Cincinnati Fantasy Group and to go to Midwest Con. And one way he did that would hang out at bookstores and talk to people who were browsing the science fiction section.
I think the future of fandom or recruiting people into fandom is going to be online. I think there are a number of younger people out there who are thirsting to connect with other people, just like fanzines and letter columns in science fiction magazines of the 1930s found each other. It's much easier to find people who are interested in the same sort of things you are through either Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. So I think instead of hanging out at bookstores and waiting to be picked up by the local police, you can actually just go into Facebook and try to form a group and do a meeting.
There are several science fiction groups I'm members of on Facebook, and there are several groups that I'm part of for some strange reason, who are more national groups. We just lost someone.
Julie?
We got Julie somehow. Go ahead.
The local library, and I've seen other libraries around the country, they have a open doors to young people, and they're starting to run libcons in Canton here, the North Canton. the North Canton Library has run a couple LibCons and had many, many young people show up for the sort of panels you'd get at a general con. And that's definitely going to help if fandom writ large can tap into that energy.
Yeah. Yeah, I know my local library does a yearly anime convention, but I don't think they've really done much with any general SF gatherings, even though there used to be a fan club in Louisville that met at the library, one of the branch libraries. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. Anybody have a good want to close out this?
I should mention, if you're interested in anti-authoritarian classics like Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed, or Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, or Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, or Orwell's 1984, they're all Prometheus Hall of Fame winners, and you could visit the Libertarian Future Society website to find out more about the Prometheus Awards at lfs.org. We also have a Facebook page. It was interesting what you said about Facebook. I think that is a way that's easy for people to connect. And we do have a Prometheus visibility there. But I think sometimes people just stay on Facebook. And I think there's an inescapable goal that we should all have of actually meeting face to face, even after the pandemic.
Okay, Julie, we can't hear you. You might.
Yeah, hi. I lost my connection there for a minute.
That happens.
Again, yeah. So I guess the topic is, are our clubs going to continue? How to get younger people?
Well, that was one of the questions.
Yeah. Well, I hate to be pessimistic, but I think it's really, really a hard problem because I think Michael and all of us were talking before the session happened. And Michael was so on point by saying that science fiction has gone so mainstream that you don't have to go to a con to meet other fans or buy stuff or find out what's going on or talk to your favorite author or any of that stuff. And those are all reasons that I started going to cons and why I've always loved going to cons. But now, like I see someone wearing something cool and I say, where'd you get it? And they go, oh, Hot Topic or Walmart or something, it's just so mainstream. So I think it's going to be really tough. And then you add in, the power of Facebook and Fortnite and all these things you can do just sitting at home. I think it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get people to come out and join clubs and come to conventions.
Well, if you're in the greater Cincinnati area and have any interest, I should have mentioned before, the Cincinnati Fantasy Group has a very inactive website called at www.cfg.org. And it does have a slightly more active Facebook page because I think Chris is one of the administrators and he posts a lot on that.
Yeah. I call it carpet bombing, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
I try to keep everybody informed as, trendy things that are going on and news and opinions.
Okay. We've got about 2 minutes left if we want to take it. Or else do you think we've covered everything we want to? I guess some people, if you want to, can afterwards go into the Discord area and continue the discussion. For some reason, I have not been able to do much in Discord because it really does not like the security settings on my Mac. But
mine either. But
Scioto Odd is the Discord room. I've just been reminded by the wizard behind the curtain.
I'm hoping people who found it easier to connect to the Worldcon that was all online or NASFiC that's all online will maybe decide, maybe I could actually, once it's safe next year with vaccines, actually go out and meet people face to face, even if we continue our Zoom and Facebook stuff, because I think we're social animals. And I think there's a real community and connection. Like she was saying, it's sad if people just don't feel the need to connect, because you can get a sense of community and acceptance of all of our differences and mutual respect among the science fiction and fantasy community of
And
fandom.
and I would urge people, anyone watching, if you have an opportunity to go to DisCon 3 in Washington, D.C. next year, fingers crossed, that actually an in-person convention, it's an excellent in-person convention to go to.
And hopefully we will be able to. And with that, I think I will ask everybody to sign off so they can get the room ready for the next panel. It's been fun, and thank the panelists a lot.
Thank you, Joel.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Joel.
Thank you.
Michael,
Thank you,
Doug.
everybody. Great discussion. Bye.
Okay.
Thanks, Julie.
Bye-bye.